1987 and celebrated its 25th year's anniversary last year. It's been growing steadily from the beginning, and we are now sitting in a new building here, and we will open a new one just beside us next month. The number of staff at our university is about 180, and we have about 1,600 students. About half of our students are in distance education, and that's one of our specialities here. And for that we use 8 distant learning centers that are spread out all over the country, and we have several outposts from each of those centers. The University of Akureyri has been instrumental in the regional development in Iceland and has a wide-ranging effect on opportunity to study in the home region. The University of Akureyri is running 3 different schools with 13 undergraduate programs and 8 graduate programs. We have the School of Health Sciences with programs in nursing and occupational therapy. We have the School of Business and Science with programs in business, biotechnology, and fishery science. And we have the School of Humanities and Social Sciences with programs in social sciences, teachers' education, and in law. And that's where we have a 2-year master program in polar law. Polar law is one of our unique programs. In this program, emphasis is placed on areas of international and domestic law concerning the polar regions. We often say that the University of Akureyri has a similar role in Iceland as the University of Umeå in Sweden, or University of Oulu in Finland, or University of Tromsø in Norway. We have the responsibility of higher education outside the metropolitan area. We are members of the University of the Arctic, and in that way it's one of our roles to emphasize teaching and research related to the northern circumpolar area. All of this has become extremely important now when climate changes are having dramatic effect on the Arctic and Antarctic region. We need to work intensively to facilitate international cooperation to solve all the problems that will follow in the coming years. Even though the University of Akureyri is a relatively small university, it's independent with well-educated staff. Our students seem to like the personal surroundings we are able to manage here. Dear participants, I hope you'll feel this personal atmosphere while you are here, and I will wish you a successful conference. I will now give the word to the chair of the NRF Steering Committee, Dr. Lassi Heininen. Dr. Lassi is a professor at the University of Lapland and a docent of the University of Oulu, Finland, and he is also a visiting professor here at the University of Akureyri. Dr. Lassi.
Your Excellencies, Mr. President, Mr. Ambassadors, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great pleasure to welcome you to this conference on climate change in northern territories. And as a political scientist, I can't avoid to give a few points of view how the Arctic can be seen today. And climate change is mentioned to be one of the major triggers of the multidimensional changes which have happened in the Arctic recently. So there are several interpretations, what is the situation all about. And climate change is that factor which is most probably influencing the most and causing different kind of imaginations how in the future the Arctic can be seen, including that there is a race on natural resources and there are emerging conflicts. However, the reality is a little bit different. The Arctic region is very stable, very peaceful, and that's why we are here. I mean, the Northern Research Forum, when it started its activity almost 15 years ago, was one of the first academic actors there, building on that state of stability, peacefulness. But of course, climate change has caused a few things there, and we would like to see the Arctic Ocean without sea ice. So almost like we have discovered a new ocean. But like we know, this map is fake because there is still sea ice. So we are also in the future dealing with sea ice. But so often still today the Arctic is seen according the factors of classical geopolitics, emphasizing physical space, natural resources, power force of a state. Again, reality is a little bit more complicated. There is also another kind of context I call it critical geopolitics, where you have politicized based, and actually the Arctic is very much politicized nowadays. You have different knowledges, you have different identities, you have flows of globalization. And the idea behind the Northern Research Forum is very much to build on this new kind of interpretation of the Arctic today and recognize that there are people and that fact matters. So there are people, but also globalization is there. Globalization is nothing new in the Arctic. So this is very much the reality of the Arctic region today. So the Arctic is not more, not less than part of the globe. The Northern Research Forum organized its 6th Open Assembly 2 years ago, and the theme was Our Ice-Dependent World. So we brought experts coming from not only from the different parts of the Arctic region, but also Antarctic, the Himalaya region. So that was the moment when finally we could say that we went into global. And ice is cool, and ice is something what really we need also in the future. The Northern Research Forum is all about to implement the interplay between science and politics. And science is part of a society. That is very much how we would like to see it. So science is much more than laboratories. It's people, it's the environment, it's a dialogue, it's an attitude. And that is what we would like to bring on the table here. There are, I mean, this is only a few examples of what kind of bottlenecks there are when trying to implement the science policy interface. There is too much old ways of thinking and acting when actually we have so much more scientific knowledge there. But there is a lack of dialogue, real kind of dialogue where we are going to use that knowledge. And I mean, what might be needed? Well, it's easy to say that we need more meetings, more talk, more research. But maybe that's not enough, it's not enough anymore. We need more patience to listen and discuss. we need more understanding and capability to apply research outcomes and knowledge. And we need an issue-oriented dialogue across disciplines, across sectors, and between different knowledges, between science, business, and politics, between the state and the civil society. And this is very much why the NRF would like to be active here and organize these open assemblies, in order to have fresh thinking and both new ideas there, and to trust on dialogue. I don't go through these 5 rules by Kornprops, but I have found them very interesting. So dialogue is not that simple, what it is so often interpreted. If you really would like to have real dialogue. And I'm proud that the Northern Research Forum have found 2 more rules there. So to have open democratic dialogue with patience and mutual respect, and also to include and implement interdisciplinarity and intersectoriality. So these are very much the principles how we would like to see the implementation of the interplay between science and politics, and I really hope, I'm sure that this will happen here during these 2 days here in Akureyri, Iceland. You are the most welcome to join the dialogue here. Thank you. And it's my pleasure to welcome Greta Thor, who is the main organizer on behalf of Espon Enekon. He's a professor here at the University of Akureyri. Greta, please.
Something was wrong with the technique. President of Iceland, Mr. Ólafur Ragnar Grímsson, and dear guests, welcome to our conference on climate change in Northern Territories. Welcome to Akureyri, our town at 66 degrees north, and welcome to our growing university. My name is Grétar Þór Eyþórsson, and I am a professor here at the University of Akureyri, and I am also the Espon contact point for Iceland. Therefore, I am the head of organizing this conference on behalf of the Enekon project. And the Espon Enekon project group welcomes you to this conference in Akureyri, a conference focused on an important issue: the socio-economic impact of climate change. This event was originally initiated by the Enekon group, and we got Northern Research Forum into cooperation on this. That has ensured the broad scientific and practical scope here. We are happy that this cooperation became a reality and we have been successful to gather here more than 100 people. The Espon 2013 program, Espon stands for European Observation Network for Territorial Development and Cohesion, was adopted by the European Commission on 7th of November 2007. The program budget of 47 million euros is partly financed at the level of 75% by the European Regional Development Fund under Objective 3 for European Territorial Cooperation. The rest, 25%, is financed by 31 countries participating, 27 EU member states, and Iceland, Liechtenstein, Norway, and Switzerland. The mission of the ESPON 2013 program is to support policy development in relation to the aim of territorial cohesion and a harmonious development of the European territory by, first, providing comparable information, evidence, analysis, scenarios, and territorial dynamics, and second, revealing territorial capital and potentials for development of regions and larger territories, contributing to European competitiveness, territorial cooperation, and a sustainable and balanced development. The actions carried through under the program include different, however strongly interrelated operations. Firstly, applied research on different themes of European dynamics. Second, targeted analysis together with stakeholders, which is an important project type. Third, scientific platform development supported by the ESPON database. 4, capitalization of ESPON research that includes media activities and different ESPON publications. Events such as ESPON seminars and workshops are regularly organized. And that's under this part 4 we are working under the ENICON project. And 5th, technical assistance, analytical support and communication. A little about the ENICON project and the background of this conference. ENICON stands for ESPON Evidence in a North European context. ENICON is one of the so-called, as I said, the transnational networking activities conducted under the priority 4 of the ESPON 2013 program, aiming at activating transnational interest in ESPON by involvement of policymakers, practitioners, and scientists. The transnational networking activities are carried through by groupings of members of the ECP network. ECP stands for ESPON Contact Point. Network based on a strategy, including a package of numerous activities. The ENICON project is one of those. The project has, until this event, organized several networking activities. A postgraduate workshop in Joensuu, Finland, a scientific workshop in Stockholm, Sweden, and a postgraduate workshop in Tartu, Estonia. A workshop in Aalborg, Denmark, is planned in 2014. This conference is one of the 2 big events in this project. The other one is planned to take place in Norway in the spring 2014. The original idea behind organizing this conference was that the global climate changes whereby scientists predicted to have great environmental and social impact in the Arctic as well as in the northernmost countries in Europe. The impact is predicted to be on nature resources as well as on communities. In addition, the global climate change is predicted to open a new sailing route from the North Atlantic Ocean through the Barents Sea to the far eastern parts of the globe. This opening is apparently going to have a great impact on the economic and social opportunities of northerly regions of European countries. The northern regions of Norway, Russia, as well as Iceland are believed to be affected by this. In the ESPON and the European context, Denmark has also interest in this by its connection with Greenland. The impact of this will most likely be widespread in this area. This has already and will in near future mean an increasing need for research in the field of both natural and social sciences. With this conference, we in the ENICON project want to turn our faces towards the regional challenges for northern European regions, to put the focus on future research in the northernmost regions in Europe and in the Arctic. We thought it would be wise and necessary to organize such a conference in cooperation with the Northern Research Forum. Our belief is that ESPON knowledge, ESPON research, methodology and experience could contribute to future research in the northernmost parts, where the problematic is in many ways so different different from what it is in the more central parts of Europe. Further, the idea is that such a conference could bring together researchers which have similar background but have been focusing on different problems and situations. Regional and local stakeholders, as well as state politicians, have also been a target group for this conference. We in ENICON hope that the outcome of this new type of cooperation, which we have had with NRF, will give us here interesting contributions, a lot of discussion, and not at least networking that can bring together scientists and stakeholders. Ladies and gentlemen, hope you have a good and giving conference. And now I give the word over to Mr. Stefán Sigurðsson, the rector of the university. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very pleased to introduce the President of Iceland, Dr. Ólafur Ragnar Grímsson. Dr. Ólafur Ragnar Grímsson was elected the 5th President of the Republic of Iceland on the 29th of June 1996, and then for a 4-year term. He was re-elected in the year 2000, again in the year 2004, and in 2008, and for his 5th term in 2012. Dr. Ólafur Ragnar Grímsson has a PhD degree in political sciences. He was the first professor in political sciences at the University of Iceland. He served as a member of Alþingi, the parliament. He was a Minister of Finance 1988 to 1991, and served as the chairman of the People Alliance Party. Dr. Ólafur Ragnar Grímsson was a chairman and later international president of the International Association of Parliamentarians for Global Action. The PGA is an association of over 2,000 parliamentarians in about 80 countries. He accepted the Indira Gandhi Peace Prize on behalf of the association in 1987, and he has received several other international prizes. Dr. Ólafur Ragnar Grímsson has always been a strong supporter of all matters related to the Arctic, and the University of Akureyri would like to thank him for all his help. Dr. Ólafur Ragnar Grímsson will now give us the opening speech of the conference. President Ólafur.
Ambassadors, rector, scientists and students and dear friends, it's indeed not only a great pleasure for me but also somewhat a moving experience to come to Akureyri once again to celebrate the gathering of Northern Research participants, and remembering, as Lasse mentioned a few minutes ago, that is now 15 years since I traveled to Rovaniemi and was privileged to give the celebratory lecture of the 20th anniversary of the University of Lapland. And in that presentation, I tried to convey the need for a new type of dialogue and cooperation between scientists and experts, and especially young people who are interested in the future of the Arctic, modeled to some extent of what visionary leaders decided to do in the 1970s at the European political science level, when the ECPR was established as an annual venue for young European scientists coming together from political science, sociology, anthropology, economics, to analyze the transformation of that continent. I can tell you here in confidence that the leadership of the University of Lapland was a bit skeptical of this idea. So they commissioned Lasse to study whether this new president of Iceland was making any sense whatsoever. And fortunately, and that is the fundamental basis of our friendship, Lasse and mine, that he then a year later presented to the university his firm conclusion that I did indeed make sense. And then, in a few weeks' time, there will be 13 years since we came here to Akureyri for the first meeting of the Northern Research Forum. It was a beginning, but it was not a strong beginning. Most of us who came together from Russia, from Alaska, from Finland, and different parts of the Arctic had never met before. It was a gathering of people who were motivated in the same way and jointly felt the need to create a network, but were not absolutely sure how to do it. And I am mentioning this here this morning to remind all of us, when we start discussing the transformation in the Arctic with respect to climate change and the new situation, that in this extraordinary short time, just over a decade, we have seen a fundamental, historical transformation of the Arctic. It has moved from being almost off the radar screen, internationally speaking, to becoming the new economic and political and scientific playing field of the world. A transformation confirmed by the Arctic Council last May in its wise decision to expand the observer state participation to the leading countries not only in Asia but also in Europe. So now the Arctic Dialogue is composed of representatives from 11 of the biggest economies in the world. I say that again, because it's such a revolutionary transformation that the 11 biggest economies in the world have now in one way or another been linked to the Arctic table, either as permanent member states of the Arctic Council or as observer states. And within that group are those who create most of the CO2 emission in the world, are economies and countries that through their joint actions are primarily responsible for the climate change pattern and the melting of the ice in our parts of the world. When we were hesitantly moving along the Northern Research Forum early journey, we somehow thought that this kind of an awareness, the opening up of the new sea routes, the moving of the Arctic to the center of the global states might perhaps happen around the middle of the 21st century. It is already now a reality which we have to face. That is the speed of the transformation. And that is the first point I want to emphasize here this morning, that the momentum of the Arctic cooperation on the Arctic issues and the Arctic challenges has been transformed in a fundamental way. It is no longer a process where we can afford to move slowly forward by coming together perhaps every second year or every year in smaller meetings and so on and so forth. There is so much at stake, and there are now so powerful players which have arrived in our Arctic neighborhood that we have to change the way we do research and talk and have dialogue and come together on these issues if we are going to maintain our vision of letting the future of the Arctic be a fundamentally democratic and common project, where anybody, whatever their position, whether they're old or young, a student or a president, can come to the table with the same right to speak, with the same right to air their concerns and make the contribution. The second point I want to make here this morning is the positive challenge of now having countries like France and Germany and United Kingdom and India and China and South Korea and Singapore and the others involved in the Arctic dialogue together with Russia and the United States, us and Iceland and the other Nordic countries and Canada. I welcome it. Why do I do that? Why do I not have this kind of narrow view that this is our Arctic? And these strange fellows who have suddenly come in our neighborhood should be kept far away. I welcome it because what they are doing in their home garden, the economies of France and Germany and China and India and South Korea, are impacting the Arctic more than all the Nordic countries put together, because of the chemical consequences of the economic operations of the countries, the emissions, and the effect it has on the melting of the ice. But I welcome it also because within those countries there are enormous scientific resources. There are formidable universities and research institutions which could become very constructive partners in the efforts that we have started some years ago and are engaged in now every day. Let me illustrate. Last summer, the Chinese Polar Institute sent the Snow Dragon, the icebreaker, from Shanghai across the northern route close to the Northern Pole to Iceland, with over 60 young Chinese scientists on board. The Polar Institute had discovered that the melting of the Arctic sea ice in 2007 had the following winter caused severe weather patterns in China, destroying power lines, railway lines, infrastructure, food productions, having tremendous negative economic consequences. Last summer, as we all know, and as the research expedition found out, confirmed also by European and American scientists, the Arctic sea ice was melting even further. I don't know how many of you are familiar, because the Western media didn't carry it very strongly. This January and February was consequently the worst winter in living memory in China, with more destruction than Storm Sandy caused in the United States. The direct relationship between the melting of the Arctic sea ice and extreme weather patterns not many years ahead, but a few months later in China. A fact which American scientists hope to use to illustrate the impact of the Arctic sea ice to the extreme weather patterns on the American and the North American continent. Similarly, South Korea has established a very strong polar research institute, which we need to familiarize ourselves with to a greater extent than we have done so far. And when the new Arctic ambassador of Singapore turned up in Akureyri last year and in Reykjavik, I can admit here, if you don't report it, that first when I heard it I thought it was some kind of a joke, because although I thought I was reasonably well informed about Arctic issues, I had never heard about the Singapore Arctic ambassador. Now, a few months ago, Singapore sent its first ambassador to give their credentials to the Republic of Iceland. So, for the first time in our history, we now have a formal diplomatic relationship with Singapore in the same year as we celebrate the 70th anniversary of our diplomatic relationship with Russia. Within the Foreign Ministry of Singapore, they now have a formal structure consisting of the ambassador for Arctic issues and all the bilateral ambassadors to the Arctic Council countries, working throughout the year in building scientific, economic, diplomatic, and political ties with the Arctic countries. Why? Because Singapore, the government, the people, the scientific community have realized that with the aggressive melting of the Arctic sea ice and the Greenland ice sheet, Singapore could potentially disappear as the thriving economy it now is before the end of this century. As the ambassador said, the melting of the Arctic, both the Greenland ice sheet and what's happening around the Arctic, is more of a security threat to Singapore than the military forces in the neighboring country. We all know that in the United Kingdom, in Germany, in France, there are strong scientific institutions that have an excellent tradition and an extraordinary community of scientists and experts that could have a strong impact on the Arctic dialogue in the coming years. And as President Putin said so wisely at the first conference organized by the Russian Geographical Society in Moscow a few years ago, and repeated in Arkhangelsk the following year, the progress in the Arctic has to be based on science. That is a very important statement. Not on political interest or old balance of power concerns. It has to be guided by science. And when we started the journey on the Northern Research Forum, our vision was only limited to the 8 Arctic countries. We sought participants only among ourselves. But now, my dear friends, we witness a fundamentally different playing field, which, in my opinion, offers the Arctic dialogue, the Arctic scientific community, the scholarly community, an extraordinary new opening, which none of us could have dreamt of when we came together here in Akureyri only 13 years ago. But let me also, before I finish, add 2 other points. The first is this: doing research on the Arctic ice, the communities, and this huge landmass and big oceans that we have and composes the Arctic is an expensive business. It requires machinery, infrastructure, icebreakers, stations, universities, travel. It is more costly than most other long-term research that we do in our countries. And maybe, I say maybe, the United States, Russia, and China will afford by their own to move this forward, but I doubt it. I have become convinced that now, if we are going to keep up with the speed of climate change and the melting of the ice, if we are really going to bring the message of what's happening to the Arctic to the entire world and making it the basis of global decision-making on climate change and the world economies, we need to pull together our institutions, our resources, the infrastructure facilities available for Arctic research. And that kind of cooperation doesn't really exist at this stage. So one of the things that maybe we could talk about, both here in Akureyri and in the coming months and next few years, because it will not happen suddenly, is to find a way that the scientific institutions, the universities, the research institutions, those who own the icebreakers and keep the stations going and bring finance to the big projects, do it in the joint way which the international polar years have shown us can be done. And by pooling our resources together in this way, we could have a much stronger base to move forward on the Arctic issue and try to make sure that with the aggressive melting of the ice, we are not simply left on the old railway station, while the railway has moved ahead in a big way. And like the Northern Research Forum 15 years ago was a new idea to bring people together, I feel strongly now that we need to escalate this level of cooperation very quickly and very extensively. My final point is this. I have been fortunate to be informed and experienced in the last 3 or 4 years that the success of the Arctic cooperation, how we have in the Arctic countries replaced the Cold War with a strong and effective network of cooperation with the Arctic Council as its core and fundamental institution, giving the indigenous people rights to participate and have their voice beyond what is done in other parts of the world. This Arctic model is now being looked at and discussed by people in other continents and other parts of the world, especially in the Himalayas. As Lasse mentioned, 2 years ago in Iceland, we brought together through the Northern Research Forum umbrella and the efforts of my office and the University of Iceland, the first meeting where the Himalayan scientists and the Arctic scientists came together. They have a lot of glaciers too. They are about 30,000-40,000 or more. At the present state, there are less than 10 glaciologists in India. That is 1 glaciologist per 1,000 glaciers on the Indian side of the Himalayas. The Indian government, in the light of the experience that this dialogue that was started here in Iceland has produced, has now decided to train in the next 10 years 200 glaciologists in India, and to establish for the first time the first glacial institute in India. Similarly, the people of Bhutan, Nepal, and other regions up in the Himalayas are looking at the participation of the different regions and the indigenous people in different parts of the Arctic. So what we have been doing in the last 10 years or so, and all of us know it's not been an easy journey in the Arctic, has however succeeded in creating a model of cooperation that now the nations, for example, in the Himalayas, are looking at in a very extensive and eager way. The scientific cooperation, the indigenous cooperation, how to encourage young people to devote their academic and further career to these issues. And at the Arctic Circle meeting that will come together in Reykjavik in October, there will be a strong participation from the Himalayan countries coming there especially to learn more from the Arctic experience, how they can build knowledge, peace, cooperation in their part of the world. Because the first disastrous effect of climate change will not happen in our part of the world. Paradoxically, we will see a lot of economic benefits from climate change in the Arctic through the opening up of new sea routes and other facilities, although there will also be negative sides. But in the Himalayan region, the effects will be almost exclusively disastrous on a big scale, because over 1 billion people depend for their livelihood, their water resources, their power projects, and their economies on the glaciers and the water system in the Himalayas remaining in their present state. And those glaciers are much thinner than the one in Iceland or in Greenland. They will melt much faster. But the cooperation between the countries is hardly existent. As I said to my good and old friend, the Prime Minister of India in April, it is paradoxical that with a membership as observer state of the Arctic Council, India and China are closer to cooperating on the Arctic in our part of the world, the ice in our part of the world, than on the Himalayas on the ice in their part of the world. But the success of our cooperation and our dialogue could become a very important model to help those countries to move forward and deal with their threat from climate change. So let me once again congratulate the Northern Research Forum for having survived for this time. Thank the university and the other co-hosts for bringing this together, and share with all of you my optimistic vision that we are now responsible not just for our Arctic, which we thought 10 years ago. We have now moved center stage in an area which is of more fundamental global importance in this new century than perhaps any other area on planet Earth. Thank you very much.
Make a PowerPoint?
Thank you very much, President Grimson, for that enlightening speech, and for giving this group of scientists and young researchers much to consider during our discussions over the course of the Open Assembly and Conference. I have the honor and pleasure of welcoming you to the first keynote session of the NRF and EPSON Climate Change in Northern Territories Open Assembly and Conference. My name is Stephen Bigraw. I am a member of the NRF Steering Committee and Executive Committee. I've been involved in Arctic research for over 30 years as a scientist and a manager, and 18 months ago I had the luck of the draw, if you will, to be able to retire as the Executive Director of the Canadian Polar Commission. I will act as the moderator for this keynote session, and I believe we are very fortunate this morning to have as our first keynote speaker Ms. Patricia Cochran. Ms. Cochran serves as the Executive Director of the Alaska Native Science Commission, an organization that brings together research and science in partnership with Alaskan Native communities. Ms. Cochran also served as chair of the 2009 Indigenous People Global Summit on Climate Change and is co-chair of the Indigenous Peoples Global Network on Climate Change. She is the past chair of the Inuit Circumpolar Council, an international organization that represents 160,000 Inuit of Alaska, Canada, Russia, and Greenland. She is the former chair of the Indigenous People Secretariat
to the 8-Nation Arctic Council, and former Arctic representative to United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. Ms. Cochran's topic today is Community Partnership for Self-Reliance and Sustainability. Patricia, may I invite you to come up?
This one here. Good to go. Okay, and where's the up and down? Where's the advance? Where's that? Oh, yeah, just here.
Good morning, everyone. Sorry for that delay there in getting all the technical requirements met. Mr. President, thank you for those very interesting words and gave us a lot to think about. The ambassadors, I appreciate all of you being here. I'm very happy to see all of our young researchers who are here as part of our guests here. And my friends and colleagues, I thank you for inviting me. I hope that you will allow me a couple of minutes to do things according to my own traditions, my own protocols from my community as an Inuit person coming from Alaska. And that is, first of all, to give thanks to the Creator for this beautiful day that has been given to us. Next, to honor and to recognize the people whose lands I stand upon today, to thank you for allowing me to be here and to speak on your homelands. I also must honor my elders who are here among us and to pay our respects to all of our ancestors who have come before us. To us in the Inuit world, this is the way that we open every day. It's a way that we open everything that we do by helping to ground us wherever we are, to remind us where we come from, to remind us what is important to us as human beings on this planet. So thank you for allowing me to start in my own traditional way. I am going to be talking a bit this morning, and I know we're running a bit behind schedule. I'll try to keep somewhat on time. I'm going to talk about Indigenous people and how the climate change has been impacting our communities. Let me first of all recognize that climate change to us is part of all of the issues that we deal with, and there are myriad. There are many, many issues that we in the Arctic have to live with. Everything from alcohol abuse, depression, suicide, poverty, all of those usual things that are just part of our everyday lives. Climate change is another issue that we now face as residents of the Arctic, and it's something that is truly impacting our communities in Alaska and the Arctic heavily, and that's what I hope to impart to you today. Let me start first of all by recognizing that some of these slides I'm showing to you are from a draft report that has yet to come from the United States. It is called the Draft National Climate Assessment, and it will be released next year. I was fortunate to serve as an author on both the Alaska Arctic chapters as well as the tribal chapter that will be part of the 2014 report coming from the National Climate Assessment. So please recognize that these are draft documents that are coming to you at this point. I'll also tell you that the tribal chapter is the very first time that the United States has had a tribal chapter as part of the climate assessment. So to us that was quite important for us to look at issues not only as a nation but really as Indigenous peoples as well. So here are some of the things that come from our draft NCA report. Key issues about warming. That Alaska has already warmed an average of 3 degrees and in some places up to 7 degrees, with more warming that is projected. We have many consequences that we know will be coming from from the warming in our areas, including human health, our infrastructure, habitat, our food sources, our way of life, our ecosystem changes, invasive species, tourism. These are all things that we know are going to be on our plate over the next few years. Health issues. We know that, and we are already seeing, as you can see in the picture here, we're seeing damage and disruption to our water and our sanitation systems. You can see in this picture of the village of Newtalk, the one on the bottom photo here. This is a community that has already been inundated. They have seen flooding conditions happening in their area for quite some time. We know that these events are already occurring and are going to happen more and more. Obviously, that means that our sewer and water systems are no longer functioning there. We have real issues of the health and safety of our children, the drinking water, etc. We know that this also will change wildlife. Conditions in changes in marine conditions, and also we're seeing, I don't know if you're seeing the same things here, but we're seeing a real rise in insects coming into our areas as well. I imagine it's the same in most other Arctic nations, but for us, we're seeing much more of that. Erosion issues. The declining sea ice has increased the erosion on our coastal communities. You can see on the picture on the left, this is my hometown in Nome. And that house that's being washed away there by the river, by the water, it's my brother's house. So as we can see, this is very personal. This is not just a story that's somewhere far off in the distance that you may see on CNN or some other news report. This to us is our daily life. It's what we see every day. In Nome, we actually built there was a rock seawall that was built there, and it has helped somewhat to keep the storms from eroding and crushing our main streets. But many of the places where they've tried different rocks, putting rocks in front of their communities, other kinds of revetment just has not worked. They've been washed away by storms. We, of course, see that there's immediate threats to life and property and a need for resources for relocation. In the other photo, you see another example of a community in Alaska, Shishmaref, which has sort of served as a poster child for what is happening in the Arctic. This is a place that has already lost about half of their community, as you can see. They're literally falling into the sea. Permafrost, another issue that we know is happening. We have mentioned many years ago in Alaska, at least in the starting in the 60s or maybe even before, when I became aware of it. People were talking about climate change, even though we didn't have that name for it then. People were talking about all of these issues, permafrost melting, our traditional ice cellars, where we used to store all of our food that would be safe because the frost would keep it frozen. Now those ice cellars have been melting for quite some time, and our food is no longer safe in our ice cellars. That it's already warmed in 3 degrees. You can see some of the projections that are included in part of the report. And again, this has a great impact on fresh water, on sanitation systems, on all of the infrastructure. You can see in the other photo, permafrost melt, the sloughing that is happening all over in Alaska. This has already damaged many roads, many airports, all of the kinds of things that we just take for granted in our communities now are no longer there. Of course, one of the concerns that we have is methane release. It's one of those issues that really hasn't made it quite to the top of the list, but methane is going to become more and more of an issue. It's more of a problem than carbon is. And the amount of methane that is in the Arctic is unbelievable. So we're now just beginning to think about some other issues that we know will be coming up. Ocean acidification is already occurring again in our areas. It is already having impacts on some of our animal species, our critters. You can see some of the crab, for instance. We're seeing that the shell of the crab is becoming thinner, that there are also less and smaller crab that we're seeing in our areas. It's impacting shellfish and other things already. We know that there's also a great impact on our subsistence fisheries. For the first time in a very long time this year, our king salmon season in Alaska, in Anchorage, was halted. We were not allowed to take any king salmon, which is a major food source for many of our communities because of the lack of the species in our area. So again, we're seeing severe impacts. Wildfires. Wildfires are occurring much more frequently. We're having more lightning than we have ever seen in our histories before. More than 1 million lightning strikes in one season. And the one place you see on fire, yes, that is the Trans-Alaska Pipeline. That is right in front of the fire there. So of course we have other concerns. It's not just about the fires, but really what that brings, the threats that it brings to our communities as well. It also, of course, has human health impacts as well. Look at the air quality of many of our communities that's coming from all of the forest fires that we're seeing now. Of course, fueled by the warming temperatures in those areas, the trees that are now barren, that are just ripe to be burned up in smoke. So, glaciers, as President Grimson was talking about. People talk a lot about the Greenland ice sheet, but fail to recognize that the fresh water discharge from to the ocean is almost similar to that of the Greenland ice sheet, the number of glaciers we have in Alaska. And we have only a couple of glaciers that are advancing glaciers. Every other glacier in Alaska is receding. So we are really looking at more and more of an impact coming from our glaciers. This obviously has implications for global sea level rise. And when I look out my window and see your beautiful waters outside here, I'd invite you to think about what it's going to be like for you here, living so close to the waters, when the sea level rise begins to occur. If you look at what's happening with some of the scenario planning, the modeling that's going on at our universities in Alaska, you can see many places that will be underwater. When we came into your airport here and recognized how close your airport is to sea level, these are the kinds of things I think you need to be seriously considering and thinking about what that is going to do, how this rising sea level is going to really impact your area where you live. Sea ice, another huge issue for us. It's obviously declining more and more and is going to be happening. Some models project a total loss of sea ice by 2030. These timelines have become shorter and shorter, unfortunately, as time goes on. We also are looking at real issues of safety for our hunters, for people who live and subsist off of all of the Arctic species. You can see stranded hunters. So this is becoming much more of a daily occurrence. There's hardly any one of us in the state of Alaska who hasn't already lost somebody in our family or friends of ours who've gone off hunting and have fallen into the river or the ice somewhere, just simply never come home again. So again, these are true issues for us. We also need to recognize that the opening of the Arctic Ocean does have some opportunities. We know that these are coming upon us. We're already seeing increased tourists in our state. We've had one of our largest tourism seasons already this year. We know that there are increased research opportunities, marine transport, longer seasons for development, growing seasons for our foods. But also recognizing that there are some severe challenges that we are concerned with as well. Again, looking at transportation and shipping and tourism, that does impact our community when you suddenly have a shipload of 2,000 people embarking on a community of 125 folks. It makes a really big difference. So we're concerned about those things. Fishing. Because so much of our people rely upon that. Of course, the air potential spills, air pollution, noise, discharges, all of these things, search and rescue, are great challenges that we are looking at and are aware of. Let me very quickly go through just a couple of things. I wanted to bring some words to you from other groups, other Indigenous peoples who have been working on some of these issues for some time, and not just just to hear from my point of view and the work I've been doing, that this came from a working group of mostly the Indigenous people, the permanent participants to the Arctic Council, and some of the recommendations that they made. That viable policy options begin by recognizing the needs of the local people and local communities, the importance of family and households, and the livelihoods in sustainable communities. We recommend that the discussions on policy should be informed of the diversity of the understanding and misunderstanding of adaptation. Recommend that policy options include the recognition and the respect for the rights of Indigenous people. That the setting up of a climate change impact assessment working group under the Arctic Council is important, and setting up an Indigenous rights review working group is another way that we see. One other example is a recent publication that just came out from the Climate Change Journal publication in the U.S. This is one that was put together by myself and several other Indigenous people in the Arctic. Truthfully, one of the first times that we have written the articles and not have other people writing them about us or for us, that they're our own Indigenous scientists and researchers doing our own speaking. So these were some of the recommendations that came from our group: to engage communities in designing climate change solution, creating an environment of mutual respect and multiple ways of knowing, assist communities in achieving their own goals, promote partnerships, and foster regional and international networking. So let me tell you a little bit about the things that we are doing. You know, I didn't want to just be the storyteller of doom and gloom. We really have to find ways that we can begin for people to see hope, to see a future, to see a way of life that can be sustained. So this is one of the projects that my organization has been actively engaged in for the last 5 years, working with WGBH, Boston Public Television. Those of you in this room, I'm sure you've all heard of Sesame Street. Well, these are the same folks who produce Sesame Street. We were trying to find a way that we could begin to build the education of our young people so that they would understand from our own ways of knowing, learning, and teaching. They could hear our lessons, our stories from Native scientists, from Native educators. So we've now built a complete model of curriculum and class development for K through 12 that anybody can go online and look at these resources, with our own people acting as the educators. Just another last couple of slides here. Another partnership that we've been involved with is called the Community Partnership for Self-Reliance and Sustainability. Sustainability or sustainable communities is something that we recognize we have got to look at. How do we build healthy communities and sustainable communities? So we've partnered, the Alaska Native Science Commission, with our partners at the University of Alaska Fairbanks, working with their graduate students in their programs there. The university is required to provide assistance to communities, and so we wanted to bring the graduate students to help solve some of the critical problems in our communities. So we've worked very closely with all of the centers. There are at least a dozen different centers within and institutes within the University of Alaska Fairbanks that have signed on, including the Cold Climate Housing Research Program, the Alaska Energy Program, all of these kinds of resources that are now readily available to our communities. So these are just some of the villages that we're working in Igiagik, in Kayakuk, Newtok, and Nikolai. You can see some of the resources. One that's building their greenhouse using all solar and wind generation. So we're looking at some outside-the-box thinking in these areas. You can see also the solar panels that are up on the Washateria in Kayakuk. So these are just some of the few things that are going on from our area. For the first time, one of our federal agencies asked an Alaska Native organization to actually do the science plan, and not just the researchers coming in and deciding what our science would be, but for us to actually go out into the communities and figure for ourselves what research we wanted to have happen. So this is one of the research projects that my organization completed. On international issues, these are some of the things that I think Steve mentioned. A few years ago, I had the honor of working during my chairmanship with ICC, putting together the first meeting ever of international meeting of Indigenous people to talk about climate change. We had hundreds of people, Indigenous people from all over the world, from Africa to Asia to the Arctic, and everywhere in between, come together and talk about climate change. We developed a very good report that comes from each of these regions across the world, so you can find out what's going on in climate change from Indigenous communities all over. And coming out of that, we now have a global network, an Indigenous peoples global network on climate change and sustainability. We have a secretariat in the Philippines, and we work very strongly within our communities with Indigenous folks. Another international project is Many Strong Voices. It's a United Nations Environmental Program project that we've been involved with for several years. And it is an alliance between the Arctic and the SIDS, the Small Island Developing States. People wonder, well, why in the world would the Arctic have anything to do with what's going on in the SIDS? And yet we found many similarities, a lot of commonality. And I'll tell you the truth, when the ambassador from the Seychelles gets up at the UN and talks about Arctic issues, it is much more of an impact than when just I am saying that. So my being able to talk with intelligence about what's going on in the Seychelles and him about the Arctic has made a much stronger partnership. So that's why we're already doing those kinds of things. The Alaska Native Science Commission also hosts the Arctic Alliance, which is a group of Indigenous people and environmental NGOs. So it's an alliance between some people who are not really necessarily very strong supporters of Indigenous people before. We found a way that we can work more helpfully with environmental NGOs. And so it's become quite a good project. We also produce the Arctic Monitor. I hope many of you are subscribing to that. It is a weekly publication telling you everything that's happening in the Arctic. So if you haven't logged on, and please do that, and you can get a weekly update of all things Arctic. And I'm going to end with this final slide here. This is the father of ICC, Eben Hobson. This was more than 30 years ago that Eben really talked about and foretold the kinds of issues that we were going to be facing over the years ahead of us, and reminding us not only that we needed to be prepared for what was happening to us right now, to remember all of the lessons that we had learned from our traditional knowledge from our ancestors, that those were the strengths, the pillars that we had to learn to rely upon, and really to use that traditional knowledge to help guide us to the future. So I really want to acknowledge and to thank you all for inviting me to speak here today, and I hope you've all come away and learned a little bit more about what's going on in Alaska. Thank you all very much. Kuyanak.
Thank you very much, Patricia. Our second keynote speaker this morning will be one of the Northern Research Forum's young researchers, Nikolas Sellheim. He is a doctoral candidate at the Legal Cultures in Transnational World Doctoral Program at the Faculty of Law, University of Lapland. His research focuses on EU's legitimacy as an Arctic actor using the EU seal products trade ban and its impact on communities engaged in the commercial sealing industry as a case study. He holds a master's degree in polar law and worked for the Arctic Council's CAF working group and the University of the Arctic. He is the current book review editor for the Polar Record at the University of Cambridge's Scott Polar Research Institute. Nikolas is going to give us a presentation on the topics living with barbarians within the commercial sealing industry. Nikolas?
Where's yours? This one. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, ambassadors, distinguished guests. While Patricia showed us how changes in the climate challenges the sustainability and integrity of Alaskans, Newfoundlanders have to deal with completely different challenges. Political ones in the form of decisions elsewhere that affect people and communities in the province. I'm talking about decisions and discourses regarding seals and seal products. We certainly all know the image of the little white-coat seal with his large black eyes that makes us want to cuddle it. And then we know the images that we don't understand, those of red blood on white ice, which I'm not going to show here, as indeed people do react disturbed. But who are these men that kill the seals, and why do they kill them? A bit more than 100 years ago, these men were the backbone of Newfoundland's economy and considered intrepid seamen due to the dangers that accompanied the seal hunt. But with the rise of the protest movement in the 1960s, 70s, the same men were suddenly baby killers, which up to this day has not changed. To the contrary, there are very vocal voices on the internet that oppose the hunt and neglect sealers the right to live, as this example from 2011 shows. It is not humane to kill seals. I think someone should kill these idiots the way they are killing our seals. It is not, indeed, the anthropomorphic perception of the seals leads to images like these. And Newfoundlanders as a whole were condemned of being barbarians, leading to boycotts and anti-Newfoundland campaigns. The commercial seal hunt, contrary to Aboriginal hunts, has been labeled as inherently bad, cruel, and unnecessary. And policies such as the EU legislation regulating and effectively banning the trade in seal products from 2009 are to a large extent based on this image. Unfortunately, in no way are local views or needs taken into consideration here, as suggested, for example, in the Arctic Transform project, as Patricia has shown. To the contrary, there seems to be a consensus over the fact that people in communities engaged in the sealing industry do not have a right to a sustainable future. But are commercial sealers really barbarians, murderers, or baby killers? In order to find that out, I traveled to northern Newfoundland, to Woodstock, which next to many other places is where the commercial seal hunt is conducted, to embark on a sealing vessel, to observe the hunt, and get to know these barbarians. And what are those people like? Well, there was not a very barbaric welcome that I got there. In order to understand the role of the seal hunt in this community, we must look at the socio-economic construct. Based on the 2011 census, the population is 199 in Woodstock with an active workforce of around 85. And the economy is dominated by fisheries, followed by retail and mechanics. And all of the fishermen in Woodstock, around 30, are also active sealers. Since the early 1990s, around 41% of the population, especially young people, have left the community and northern Newfoundland in general. And this is due to a decline in the fisheries and sealing sectors. Although the wish to stay is prevalent, as many of my interview partners have shown. But the closure of the primary school in 2008 in the community symbolizes the implications of the ongoing trend. And contrary to the public perception, which by and large sees the commercial seal hunt as an unregulated, voracious hunt on all seals, the commercial seal hunt in Canada aims at harp seals of between 1 month to 12 months of age, the so-called beaters. And these silvery seals are hunted for their pelts, blubber, and flippers, and whitecoats have not been hunted since 1987. The hunt is based on the marine mammal regulations with a stringent enforcement scheme, and before going out to hunt seals, sealers need to undergo a compulsory training to obtain their license. At the moment, there are about 12,000 sealing licenses in Canada, although with a varying number of active sealers. There's a science-based quota system in place. For 2013, the total allowable catch was 400,000 seals, although around 90,000 were actually taken. The hunt is carried out from vessels up to 65 feet in the southeast of Canada. But indeed, danger is omnipresent still up to this day, as none of the vessels are ice-going vessels, but rather fishing vessels made of fiberglass strengthened with wood. Economically, up to a third of the annual income of the sealers is based on the seal hunt. But given the recent developments, especially in the EU, the income has dropped dramatically, as this table shows. Here we can see the landed value and the number of caught seals in relation to the EU's legislative process, and the initiative of the Newfoundland government to support the industry with a loan of 3.5 million Canadian dollars. As we can see in 2007-2008, although the catch was relatively high, the value decreased significantly, leading to a subsequent decline in the catches during the following years. Only in 2012 the value has started to increase a little, probably also due to aforementioned loan. So what does the seal hunt actually look like? To find that out, I embarked on the Stefán Sigurðsson, a 45-feet fishing vessel. We spent around 2 weeks at the front, the waters northeast of Newfoundland, without shore leave. I experienced a very hostile environment with stormy seas, strong winds, and bitter cold. The working conditions were extreme, with very long days and very short nights, and which also demanded extreme physical work. Privacy was, of course, absent, as with a crew of 7 and a living space of around 10 square meters. But the spirits were always really good, and people joked with each other and really tried to keep motivation up. But that means that the commercial seal hunt in 2013 is really one marked by tiredness, danger, lack of privacy, and, of course, not being home. Usually a seal is shot by the marksman, then gaffed aboard by the crew. Then a hacker pick is used. That's a club with a metal ending to ensure that the skull is crushed. And the seal is then bled for 20 to 30 seconds and then pelted, and therefore it's ensured that the seal is inevitably dead. Concerning animal welfare, I've observed that a stringent application of the so-called 3-step process, that means stunning, checking, bleeding, was applied, and the skipper repeatedly exhorted us of the importance of this 3-step process. In the end, our boat had around 2,000 seals on board, and I would guess that around 98% of the seals that we gaffed aboard were actually unconscious. Apart from the commercial usage of the seals, around 200 carcasses and hearts were kept for free community consumption. The hunt that I witnessed was marked by professionalism, and the public notion of bloodlust was absolutely absent. There was no interest in letting the animal suffer, and which indeed also from an economic perspective wouldn't make any sense, because a struggling seal damages the pelt. And the precision in shooting and speed was really astounding. Of course, my Bambi perception of the seal made it difficult to watch in the beginning, until I realized that there is a significant difference in the hunter's relationship to the seal. It is depersonalized, and the seal is considered a fish even, instead of a pet. This is best reflected in the Canadian/Newfoundlanders notion of seal fishery instead of hunt. And the seal is one among many species that can be harvested. But so, seal hunting has a very bad reputation. There is not much benefit, and there are high investments and uncertain yields. There are dangers, discomfort, and stress. So why on earth would anybody go sealing? Well, sealing provides the first opportunity to work after a long jobless winter. It provides income through the sales of pelts, blubber, and flippers, which can be quite significant. It moreover generates income for the community, as fuel, bullets, and other supplies are all bought at the local store. Moreover, it provides the community with free food. And lastly, it's a means to express identity. The sealers and fishermen in unison say, "We have the sea in our blood." But now let's look at the processing sector. There are 2 processing plants in Newfoundland, one small one in Fleur-de-Lis in the north, and a larger one in the place called Dildo in the south of the island. A third one in Catalina closed down last year. The plant in Dildo, the Carruth plant where I work, permanently employs 38 people of all age groups and both sexes, and provides employment for around 100 people during the wet season when the new seal products come in. The dwindling market for seal products strikes harder in these communities and the processing sector than in the hunt, because hunters have the possibility to diversify their catches. And with the closure of the Catalina plant, the Carruth plant gained even more importance, of course, by taking over some of the workers who then had to relocate and are now forced to not live in their communities anymore. But if the Carruth plant were to close down, the region would not only lose employment, but it would also enhance outmigration and community dissolution. But nevertheless, this is not only a means to earn money for the families. It is more than that. They feel pride in working in the industry due to its long-standing history and importance in Newfoundland. and also on a family level, because many of the workers there have a multi-generational history in the sealing industry. Moreover, they feel pride for the sealers that risk their lives to provide families that they don't even know with food on their plates. And how was I greeted when I got there? Again, with open arms, because the workers were happy that finally is somebody interested in them. And there is anger and frustration about the fact that decisions are made elsewhere and the drastic effects need to be carried by them. The public discourse has labeled the industry as unnecessary, but it is indeed necessary for hundreds of people that have little alternatives other than moving away. Although the overall contribution of the sealing industry to the Canadian economy is small, families in the processing sector depend on it. And that's especially the case when young mothers and fathers both work in the Carruth plant. It is my view that a rational discourse on the hunt and the industry needs to be established, away from stereotypes and misconceptions. There is a need to frame a dialogue in the first place, and as in the case with indigenous peoples, as Patricia has shown. There is a need for knowledge on living conditions in Newfoundland, on the hunt and industry itself, on the socio-economic realities in these small communities, and of course on the people. There is a need for discursive change which does not sideline human beings, just because what they do looks ugly and may contradict common opinion. There's a reason why they do it. Before I left Newfoundland, one of the workers said to me, "Tell them, Nikolas, tell them that we're not barbarians. We're husbands and wives. We're humans." And I think that really sums it all up. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nikolas. We're running a little bit behind time, but one of the key features of the Northern Research Forum in the Open Assembly has always been a discussion period where you ask questions. So at this point, I would like to take questions from the floor for our two panelists. Do I see any? Any hands? No questions yet? Well, I have one for Nikolas. You seem to be a lone voice in the EU advocating for sealing. How is it perceived within the EU and within the community, the university community that you work in? How is your work perceived?
Well, I have to make clear I'm not advocating sealing. I'm trying to establish a rational discourse on this. Well, in Canada, my work was welcomed, or is welcomed, by, especially, as I said, by the people in the processing sector, because they have the feeling that they have never been talked to, and they just want to kind of gain a voice. And I'm trying to also kind of make their voice heard, not advocating it, but really trying to, well, make them also an important player in this whole debate. And on the EU level, it's really, at least the parliamentarians that I talk to are very split on the issue. Some say it's no, it's not good what you're doing there. Others say it's absolutely necessary that somebody finally does it. And so that's, well, I don't know. Let's see where that takes me, I suppose.
It sounds pretty mixed reactions.
Yeah.
Does anyone else have any questions for? Yes?
Sorry. I have a question for Ms. Cochran. I was interested in the partnerships of the Alaska Native Science Commission with these global partners, and I wondered if there was a distinction that was made in a prioritization to work with the international science organizations, and why that would be, as opposed to working at the domestic level.
Well, I can tell you that we actually try to work on all levels. So international and global and locally, all of those things are really important to us. To be honest with you, over the last few years, you know, our site really has gone beyond just our own borders. We've recognized that we have to know what's going on in the rest of the world. And we have to be aware of what's happening with other indigenous peoples and communities worldwide. So that's really why it was important to us to start looking beyond our own borders, beyond our own knowledge systems, to begin to find those relationships that would work for us. So it's more than just it is international, it's national, and it's local as well. All of those things.
I believe Ambassador Wheeler, you had your hand up? No? Was there someone in that corner that had their hand up? No? Right, over there. Please. Can you give us your name and
yes, I will.
Your question?
My name is Edward Heiðarsson. I'm based here in Akureyri, and I was wondering if I could solicit some reflections on your behalf, Nikolas, in terms of your talk on the seal hunt. If in the communities you visited, tourism is being identified as an economic sector to be developed to some extent, or if it's so, and to what extent it's being happening, and how the perceptions of the locals as, well, barbarians, quote unquote, could possibly impact that. Now, the reason why I ask is, of course, we have a similar ongoing debate in Iceland in terms of whaling and whale watching, whilst the whale watching industry claims this is impacting their business development, the whaling, which is making declining economic sense, it seems. So we have a very similar situation here. So just solicit some reflections on your behalf. Thank you, Nikolas.
Thanks. Yeah, that is a very tricky question because it's very expensive to fly to Newfoundland. It's not that expensive to actually fly to St. John's itself, but to get away from there is pretty expensive because there's no real infrastructure. And of course there are roads, but then you would have to rent a car and stuff. So in other words, the tourism industry is really not very well developed. And there are, it's growing though. But there are also very open campaigns that call for boycotts to go to Newfoundland because of the seals. And as you said, it's with the whales in Iceland too. And so tourism, at least in the areas where I was, doesn't play a role at all. And in St. John's, in the capital of Newfoundland, yes, but in the smaller communities, no.
Patrick?
Patrick Borby from the Arctic Council. Patricia, I was wondering if you would care to give the Inuit or the Aboriginal perspective on the sealing issue, because of course the impact that ban, and of course it's not just the EU, others including your own country have instituted a ban, and that has had a pretty significant impact in Inuit communities across circumpolar north, and it's certainly something that we're concerned about, but your perspective would be appreciated.
Well, I can tell you that certainly from the ICC world, from Inuit Circumpolar Council, there's been a lot of discussion around the issues of sealing. We've actually written several papers and position papers on banning, especially looking at the EU seal ban. It's for sure, it impacts many of our communities who, again, depend upon the seal, not only as a source of food for their own people, but really as a product as well, so that they're selling the wares that come from the seal itself. For us, I think Nikolas was right on in saying that this is part of our identity, it's part of our culture, it's an intrinsic part of what we've always done and who we've always been. We have a different relationship than other people do to our animals and to the world around us. We see them when we hunt, when we fish, any of those things, we look at those as gifts, the spirit, that animal giving itself to us for our needs of our own people. So we thank them in our own ways, and we recognize that this is a gift that their spirit is giving to us. So it is a spiritual connection, a cultural connection, and much more than just an economic issue.
Thank you, Patricia. Any other questions? Yes, please.
Thank you for your presentations, both very excellent. I'd just like to know what is the impact of climate change on seal hunting, and how do you see the future of that?
My question would be very, very complex. So please go ahead.
I'm not sure that mine will be less complex. Well, the impact of climate change on all of our animals is significant. We're seeing not only seals, walrus, whales, all of the things that we rely upon for our traditional food sources are becoming much more difficult to get to. What used to take, we could harvest whales, for instance, in Barrow, way up north in Alaska. We could get a whale maybe only 2 or 3 miles offshore. And now those hunters who go out in their their boats, in skin boats, are now having to go 20, 30, or 40 miles away from their community to get that same animal. And when you're trying to haul a few tons of whale back to a community in a skin boat, you can tell that obviously that makes a real difference in your ability to not only hunt, but also to hunt more safely. Our ice conditions are obvious, real factors. We've had hunters that have been stranded, that we've actually had to fly out helicopters to bring hunters who are stranded out on ice floes and can't get back to safe ground. So we've already had many experiences like that are already beginning to occur.
Thank you, Patricia. We have time for 2 more questions, and I believe there's one in the back on that side.
My name is Kristinn Skram from the Center of Arctic Policy Studies. I'd like to follow up perhaps on Edward's question. Whereas globalization affects tourism, and tourism is increasing in many areas, does tourism have an effect, if I ask you, Patricia, on the identity of and heritage of indigenous communities?
Well, I think certainly in some ways. The example that I gave of a large cruise ship coming into a small community will certainly have an impact on the environment around us, on what people go and trample upon. People always want to go and investigate what's going on around your community. So if they're picking the berries, or if they're out hunting or fishing or any of those other things, that might just be part of a usual tourism adventure, that will certainly have an impact on us. So there's some eco-tourism issues. But on the other hand, let me also tell you that we are indeed very adaptable and resilient people in the north. We had a cruise ship that somehow snuck in from Germany, and people in Barrow one day found a cruise ship from Germany with 400 tourists on their shores. But we very quickly got out all of our things to sell to them and made quite a good profit on that tourism ship. So you have to look at all sides of it. I think that those communities that are healthy communities and are fairly intact in their culture, understanding their values, that have elders there who are really helpful in maintaining their traditions, their culture, their dances, their songs, their stories. So those are the communities who will do quite well.
Thank you. Last question. I see no takers. Oh.
I'm Anton Vasilyev. I'm the Russian senior Arctic official. Patricia, thank you very much for your presentation of climate change consequences. Yesterday, I just got a call from Pavel Sulandziga, the first vice chair of RIPON. He was calling me from Khabarovsk, Amur River. Amur River is, because of climate change, is now experiencing the historic high of waters that's more than 7 meter high above the average, and now the whole town city of Khabarovsk is now in the very critical situation, and many people are experiencing difficulties. The question is that it looks like we are reaching a critical stage in changes that were predicted coming into realities. Do you think, it's a very general question, do you think in this situation that the Arctic Council is doing enough in order to cooperate in adapting ourselves and to the changes, or trying to mitigate these changes. Or from your viewpoint from Alaska, there is much more that could be done, both in general terms among the capitals of the Arctic states, or even more general as a global thing, as was presented by President Grimson, or in a more local way among the local indigenous peoples of the north, among them.
I'll try to give a somewhat brief response, Anton. I'm not sure. There are a lot of questions in there. In terms of the Arctic Council, I can say just from my own experience and having worked by your side and many others there, that it is one of the places that we feel that we have a voice, that we have an opportunity to be heard on an equal basis. And we've always been very welcomed by the Arctic Council. So I think for us as Indigenous communities, it's a great honor to be able to be part of the Arctic Council. That being said, there's always more. Things are happening so quickly, so rapidly, that I think it's very difficult to stay on top of the critical issues of today. Your call from Pavel and what's going on in Russia right now in the Indigenous communities, those are the kinds of things that happen every day. And how do you respond? I think that's one of the issues that perhaps the Arctic Council could be more actively engaged in, is really looking at critical issues, at things that are impacting communities right now, and how I know that it needs to look to the future and vision as well. We want to see that happen, but we also have to live with what is going on today. And so I hope that there's ways that we can be more proactive and more active on a daily basis. From the local perspective, let me tell you, just real briefly, Steve, one of the reasons that the Science Commission got involved in doing this community partnership for self-reliance and sustainability is because we realized very quickly that there simply isn't a federal or other agency out there who's going to write us a check for $200 to $500 million to move this village of 300 people. That just is not happening. It's not realistic. There's nobody out there doing that for us. So we had to begin to look at ways that we could begin to solve some of these problems on our own. We certainly are trying to work with all of those agencies. We're trying to get what we can from them, but in the meantime, we have to deal with this on a daily basis. So we're looking to our own ways of working within our local areas as well. So it's local as well as much more on a national and international scale.
Please join me in thanking our two speakers this morning, Patricia Cochran and Nikolas Sellheim. Before we go for coffee, Professor Gretar has a few announcements to make.
Well, before we take the coffee break, I'm first going to tell you about a quick calculation I've done. We are people representing 14 countries are collected here. 100 people, and the half from Iceland, followed by Finland at 11 participants. I'll have some practical information which is also in your folders, but I think I'll go through this just to have this clear. Your name tags is your ticket to coffee and lunches. Please make sure you have it with you for the whole duration of the conference. The next room to us, N102, is reserved as a working area for conference guests. And there is a wireless connection at this venue. You have information in your folder about that. I will ask all the speakers today and tomorrow to save a copy of their PowerPoint slides on the desktop of the computers at the rooms where they are giving their speeches. And also I have to point out that the toilets are downstairs. from here. On Saturday, 24th, there is a conference excursion. For further information and registrations for the excursion, please contact the reception. Smoking is forbidden at the conference venue except for on the patio that you may access from the second floor of the building between the stairs and the cafeteria. So if you have any questions, further questions, please contact either me or Guðrún Rósa or Ulrika from the NRF, and they are there in the back. Little about before, just practical. One correction. Session 3 is in Hall M102, not 202 as it stands in the program. Almost all sessions, parallel sessions, have 4 contributions, and every session has 100 minutes, which make it 25 minutes per each. We recommend not more than 15 minutes for the speech itself. But we are a little behind in time, and I suggest that we take a coffee break now, and we will no later than 15 past 11 will be at the parallel sessions, and we just have to cut a little bit of our lunch time. And thank you.
Good morning, everyone. This is the subject of this presentation, the reindeer, and also the economic effects of the reindeer hunting in East Iceland. The story of reindeer in Iceland is not so old. The first specimens, 13 in all, came from Finnmark in Norway in 1771. And the fourth and last group arrived in 1787. In total it was about 115 animals, and they were released in various places in Iceland. They were half tamed, and the idea was to raise them as domestic animals. This was on the initiative of local officials, but the preparation seems to be inefficient, and therefore appear to be no interest among locals to try this kind of farming. Sounds familiar today? When the animals came ashore, they were released and therefore soon became wild. The conditions in Iceland were ideal for reindeer, and in the next decades they multiplied. Soon farmers saw them as competitors to domestic animals, especially sheep, because they grazed in the same area, especially through hard winters. This led to the relentless hunting of reindeer, and in many locations they were exterminated. In 1939, the total number of the animals were only about 100. These animals were located in Kringilsáránni, an isolated area in the highlands north of the Vatnajökull Glacier. Since then, the animals were protected for some time. Since then, the reindeer stock has multiplied, a quota has been set, and controlled hunting has been allowed. In the past few years, the number of the animals has been anticipated to be about 6,000 during the summer, and you can see the hunting area on the picture here. This is based on my master thesis, and the purpose of the research was, amongst other things, to estimate the economic impact of hunting reindeer on the area where the hunt takes place, that is in East Iceland. In recent years, the tourism sector has increased more rapidly than the economy as a whole. Tourism has increasingly become a significant industry in Iceland's rural areas, and farmers involved with tourism are increasingly providing access to the land for tourist activities. As a relatively large number of hunters go to hunting late in the season, which ends in September the 20th, the hunters' use of accommodation and other services is a profitable addition to the tourism business in the area in question, because the traditional tourism season is waning at this point of time. However, there is little information on the actual economic impact of hunting tourism in Iceland, and decisions in the hunting tourism sector seem to be largely based on educated guesses. Data on hunting statistics are fragmented and in many cases outdated. The research question was, what is the economic impact of reindeer hunting on the hunting area? I did some overview of literature and researches, and the purpose of it was to help to answer the research questions and to see which method should be used doing so. I did also some foreign research on hunting and Icelandic research on angling. The survey and the data. The questionnaire consisted of 39 questions and a number of sub-questions. As the purpose of the research was, among other things, to estimate the economic effects, relevant information had to be obtained from the hunters. But the emphasis was on monetary expenditure. Part of the questionnaire pertained to those hunters that went reindeer hunting, and answers to those questions were used to estimate the economic effect. The survey was about hunting in general, but with, as I told you, questions pertaining to those hunters that went hunting reindeers. The data collection, I had some problem how to solve that, but the solution was at the end of the web link where hunters can apply for new hunting license and return their bank report, which they must do each year. A page was inserted where the hunter was asked to participate in the survey. On this page, a direct link to the survey was inserted. There were some limitations to the survey, but from the author's point of view, they were minor and didn't have any significant impact. The population of the sample in 2009, a great majority of hunters, or about 80%, used the web to turn in a bag report for the year and apply for a new hunting license for 2009. The population in the research are therefore considered to be those hunters, and the number of them was about 9,800. When the survey ended, the number of respondents was about 500, or about 5% of the population, and the Icelandic hunters who went hunting reindeer in 2009 were 1,262 of them. About 13% answered the questionnaire. More participation would have been preferable. Multipliers. The purpose here is to help to answer the research questions which pertains to the economic effects of reindeer hunting in East Iceland. The Keynesian multipliers are used to calculate gross output and disposable income, and what you see here, marginal progress in the consumer employment multipliers, direct impacts, indirect impacts, and induced impacts. These are all appropriate methods to estimate the expenditure of tourists, in this case the hunters in East Iceland. The main results of the survey: cost incurred through reindeer hunting. The table presents a comparison of amounts spent on each item, and on the other hand, the proportion of money spent in the hunting area. A large proportion spent locally and simultaneously large amount in terms of money is important for the economy of the area. When studying the table, bearing this in mind, the most important items are hunting license, guidance, and accommodation. This table is important, and data from it was used to estimate the economic impact on the hunting area later in the thesis. The number of hunters who answered each item differs. Bearing that in mind, the total amount of the mean 2,000 and 70,000 Icelandic kronur is a rough estimate, as well as the total amount spent in the hunting area, which was about 73,000 Icelandic kronur. Therefore, it can be estimated that the total expenditure on hunting reindeer in 2009 was about 300 million Icelandic krona, when the figures are multiplied with the number of issued hunting licenses that year, which was 1,333. The total cost, well, we saw the total cost on the previous picture. It was about 270,000. How long with the guide? 62% was only 1 day, 29% was 2 days. Residents of the guides, 87% of the guides were resident in the hunting area. This is an important issue, as the local guides will probably spend a much larger share of their income in the hunting area than guides from other areas. 2,400 were locals, but 139 were non-locals. Non-locals bring new money into the hunting area. They are therefore more valuable to the hunting area. And the multipliers, Y means stands for gross output, and D stands for disposable income, and you can see it's 2.13 and 2.04. Estimated number of jobs in East Iceland because of reindeer hunting, direct jobs because of research, management, and guidance, 10.7, indirect jobs because of delivered money, 10 indirect jobs because of buying goods and services, 4 forward linkage effects, 1 or 26 in total. And the answer to the research question is As you can see here on the table, gross output 162 millions, disposable income 62, and in the line next to them you can see the proportion compared to the gross area production. And we have estimated number of men here in East Iceland, 6,830, and the proportion or estimated number of jobs in East Iceland because of the reindeer hunting is 0.4%. The future, the last 10 to 15 winters have been mild. That has been, because of that, the fertility of the animals is very good. They are expanding both to the north and to the south of the traditional hunting area. These animals are very good at adapting to fluctuations in weather. The highland where these animals are grazing is healing up, and these animals are clearly gaining in the beginning. But how will the climate evolve? And in the long run, well, you know what they say about it. In the long run, we will all be dead.
Oops, are we on? Yep, thank you very much, Stefán. I think we'll take questions at the end, so if you'd like to have a seat, that would be great. Our second speaker today is Sigríður Kristjánsdóttir. Sigríður is the director of the master's program in planning and an assistant professor at the Faculty of Environmental Sciences at the Agricultural University of Iceland. Her research has focused on the urban form. More recently, she has explored the effects of business cycles on city planning and sustainable urban planning. She's going to talk about global climate changes and the tensions of sustainable development. Thank you, Sigríður.
Good day to you all. My talk is named Global Climate Change and the Tension of Sustainable Development. And I'm not going to give, it's not a research paper, it's more as an overview. And as you said in the introduction, I'm the director of the master program in planning. And I know there's one planner in the room, but but I don't know how many planners there are here. And maybe the reason I'm giving this talk is because my students are very interested in planning. And then how is the climate change going to change Iceland and what effect it's going to have, and they want to start to plan cities or harbors or other things. So this is more maybe like what do we need to have in mind relating to planning questions. Now, planning question, it's like who lands it, who is responsible, what are we going to build, where are we going to build it, when, why, and how. And those are all important questions. And I think in Iceland there's been a lot of discussion about the sea road over the North Pole, and it seems like it's coming, and I think we have to just start to plan and prepare how we're going to deal with it. Now, if we think about the sustainable development, is development that meets with the needs of the present generation without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And the pillar of sustainability, as you all know, are environment, economy, and equity, and they are all interrelated. And if we look at the northern hemisphere and where Iceland is and what is happening, and if you look at it through the lens of sustainability, it's environmental we have to consider, both for the quality of the local ecological resources and the human health, as well as the regional and global impact of local activities. And just to show you the polar bear, it's in a danger species now. And then what kind of footprint are we going to put on this northern hemisphere? And according to the Icelandic legislation, it's the environmental impact assessment and the strategy environmental assessment that is what we are using in Iceland according to the Icelandic Planning Act. And it kind of, because there are so many countries that come, that are gathered and have issues in this, so we have to decide on what kind of laws and regulations and how we are going to address this. Now, just another thing is the mitigation, and that's another planning issues, and the hazard, and also how will we save the people if there will be accident on the ship routes. Well, if you look at the economic standard, there is a sustainable approach to development to recognize that the world growing population requires the economic use of resources to meet growing demands. And there we are working with investors. And how do we overcome the obligatory tendency of the market and open up to small-scale enterprise and community initiatives? How to guide market choices towards healthy environment without sacrificing dynamic and job creation. And this also leads to the questions, how will we deal with settlement in the northern hemisphere? Is it going to be like in America, where they just, in the Wild West, where they draw just a line and then there was a guy with a gun and he shot and then everybody rushed in to get the land? And so it's a lot of things we need to think about. Now, concerning equity, it's often referred to as a social equity. This element of sustainability considers fairness in the distribution of resources and aims to reduce social inequity for improving conditions for all. And as we heard in our keynote this morning, it's both the people who are already living there and also the people who maybe want to move further north. And then we have to think about the people, and there's a lot of questions there about the life and the wealth and the health and well-being, and what kind of groups are those. And then this is a long-term political conscience and leadership, not a short-term. And we also have to think about the land and the infrastructure for planning. Roads, airports, harbors, and things like that, and just to take it into a consideration. And now, and then the people who might be moving across the northern. Now this is a Titanic. I don't want to be very negative, but just to remind you. And now there is a lot of all those sustainability. Thinking is very good, but even it's a lot of tension, and it's typical in planning to have conflicts, and some people say planning is all about conflicts. And then it's the conflicts between the ecology and the economy, and between the economy and the equity, and between equity and ecology. And I will go a little further into that. The property conflicts between economic growth and equity share of opportunities arise from competing claims on use of property as a private commodity to be used for profit, at the same time subject to government intent to ensure the social benefit are providing the same property. And then we have the resource conflict between economic development and ecological sustainability arises from competing claims on the consumption of natural resources and the preserve of the ability to reproduce. The issue is to determine how much of the exploited resource should be consumed to ensure a sustainable yield. And finally, the development conflict between social equity and environmental preservation arise from competing needs to improve living conditions of the poor through economic growth while protecting the environment. Environmental injustice is at the core of the conflict, as poor minority communities are often faced with the choice between economic survival and environmental. And I'm not going to give you any example of this, except just to demonstrate what kind of argument we can have and conflicts. And so I think instead of just saying maybe what if sometime in the future we have to start addressing this, and otherwise it's going to be and come up with agreement and a plan, so we won't have this big fight between biodiversity, climate resilience team, economic recovery team, and the equity team. And probably we could add some more teams into this picture. And so to conclude, I hope my talk have rather given you some question, but no answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Sigurðsson. Thank you. Please join me in welcoming our third speaker, who is an NRF Young researcher, Susan Carruth. She's a PhD candidate at the Arkitektskolen Aarhus in Denmark. Originally from Scotland, where she received her bachelor's and master's degree in architecture, she practiced as an architect in London with Piercy & Company before relocating to Copenhagen last autumn. Her PhD, Resilient Landscapes of Energy in Greenland, employs research through design to explore alternative energy futures in West Greenland, using the Terracultural Agency of Landscape as a model. Susan's presentation is about climate and change, Greenland's energy landscape.
Hi, good morning. Yes, I'm an architect by trade, and I trained in Scotland, practiced in London. Oops, let's just get this. So now I'm doing a PhD in Denmark at the architecture school in Aarhus. The working title is Resilient Landscapes of Energy in West Greenland, and as Amy said, I'm using research through design to try and explore potential future landscapes of renewable energy in Greenland. So I'm going to try and join some dots today between different disciplines, starting with some of the scientific research that I'm building upon. Now I think we're all quite familiar with with Greenland being used as a bit of a poster child for the impact of climatic change. But there's one document in particular I want to mention, which is AMAP's Snow, Water, Ice and Permafrost in the Arctic, published in 2011. And it outlined a whole raft of climatic and cryospheric changes in Greenland. But what really struck me as an architect was that these changes were faster than expected, and they were unpredictable because of quite complex interrelated feedback mechanisms. Energy in Greenland, there's so much buzz at the moment around fossil fuels, rare earth minerals, but what about renewable energy there? Well, in 2005, Greenland Energy 2020 was published by the Home Government, and prior to the 1990s, Greenland was fueled more or less by imported fossil fuels with very small amounts of micro-renewables. But since 1993, they have been following the medium to large-scale hydropower path, and there are now 5 medium to large-scale hydropower plants in Greenland supplying about 70% of the civilian energy requirements. So the energy plan is very much a hydropower plan. Hydropower in Greenland, as in many places in the Arctic, they aren't conventional plants for obvious reasons. So they are inside mountains or they're underneath the permafrost, which to me begs the question, how can a design that's so closely related and designed for a specific climate and a specific context, how is that going to be affected by these changes? We're talking about high capex, high investment infrastructure. And for me, then, that leads to the question, is there a way of planning a more resilient energy landscape? So I'll move on now to some of the other work that I build upon. I use this word landscape a lot. What do I mean by that? Well, for me, I define it as the complex entanglement of natural and cultural processes and forms, and it's the "and" that's the important bit. Tasta Dean, she's a British artist, says that a landscape then is land transformed, whether through the physical act of inhabitation or enclosure, clearance or cultivation, or the rather more conceptual transfiguration of human perception. And this just really underlines this dissolution of boundaries between the natural and the cultural, between the human and the non-human. And this, of course, is part of a much larger movement, kind of post-structuralist, postmodern movement of Anthropocenic thought. So the term the Anthropocene, of course, originated in the natural sciences. Paul Crutzen, an atmospheric chemist, used it to define a new geological era of where human agency is equal to or more than that of Mother Nature, if you like. But it's also been prevalent and developed in the social sciences, people like Bruno Latour, Felix Guattari, who look at things like material semiotics or neo-natures, again, this dissolution of the boundary between human and non-human, object and subject. And indeed in the arts themselves, this is Trevor Paglen, a photographic artist, so he photographs satellites rotating around Earth and amongst the, as being as present as stars, or modelling glacial change with paper within warehouses. One of my favourites, Edward Batinsky, he's a Canadian photographer, and he photographs manufactured landscapes. This series is oil, and he documents landscapes of extraction, of distribution, and critically indirect landscapes of the automobile, of suburbia, landscapes that are made possible through a very specific energy infrastructure. So what I really want to say is that all energy systems shape our landscapes, and the energy infrastructure and the biophysical environment, they are one hybrid landscape, and they are part of the same techno-natural system. So what about in architecture then, my own field? Well, Anthropocenic architecture, excuse me, I think is probably best represented by landscape urbanism. The best way to explain that is that it's the name itself, it's a conflation of landscape architecture, dealing with the natural world, and urbanism and urban planning, dealing with the cultural world, the city. So landscape urbanism often, it tries to include humans within ecology, so this is the High Line in New York, and it deals with increasing biological biodiversity simultaneously with cultural heritage. Or another one, this is the remediation of Freshkills landfill site, again just outside New York, where it's trying to build a kind of a synthetic biosystem, a synthetic wetlands that can be inhabited by people as well. And this is part of, if you like, but landscape urbanism is part of biomimicry, which I'll come back to in a minute. There's one particular figure in the architecture world, Andrea Branzi. He's an Italian designer and architect. And I want to mention him. He's quite a radical in many ways. He deals with infrastructure, but he uses words like fluidity and reversibility and lightness, not words you usually associate with really obdurate infrastructure. But to me, that's relevant to this problem I mentioned earlier of high investment energy infrastructure within a climate and context of change. One of his schemes called Agronica, he uses agricultural practice as a model for planning. So for example, a use could go in rotation like a crop, or a field it could lie fallow like a field would. And to me, some of his ideas are quite revolutionary for two reasons. One being that he looks at instead of like the biomimicry of landscape urbanism pure, he looks at natural cultural systems and uses that as a model. And secondly, he looks at a specific landscape type. He doesn't just talk about self-organisation or, emergence, but he starts to look at very specific activities and practices. So at this point, I want to introduce my hypothesis, which is what I call topomimicry. Traditionally, planning energy planning included depends upon what you might call stationarity. So it's very linear. You've got a predetermined goal and you look at points to get to said goal. But increasingly climate change adaptation experts like Vicky Arroyo are saying that stationarity is dead. It just doesn't work anymore in this unpredictability, in this climate of change. So how can consideration of moving on from stationarity, thinking about landscape urbanism and Brandsey, how could this inform energy planning in Greenland? So I mentioned biomimicry before. I presume a lot of you are familiar with it. It's spearheaded by biologists like Janine Benyus, and it looks at emulating and borrowing from the elegance of nature. For example, how do butterflies have such thin, delicate wings, yet they're tough and they're iridescent? What I want to propose is that, as wonderful and worthy as biomimicry is, could we expand that to what I call topomimicry? Now, topos is an ancient Greek, quite poetic notion really, meaning place or landscape or region. So what I'm suggesting is, could we learn from how people and nature coexist and mutually adapt rather than limit ourselves to biological models and paradigms? So some examples of what I mean might help. This is Parc de Graf by Bath Leroy Architects. It's just outside Barcelona, and it was a landfill site for the city. And what the architects did was that they studied local agricultural practices and forms, so terracing of slopes and modifying valleys and so forth. And they, looking at that, then capped this landfill in zigzagging terraces. So they not only cap and harvest the biogas released from the rubbish beneath, but it also creates an irrigation system. So the land is simultaneously remediated as well as being productive in terms of energy. Another example might be the Fog Garden by Rodrigo Perez. It's based in the Chilean desert. Now there is a tradition of hanging up plastic sheets so that during the night the cold desert air hits the plastic sheet, condenses, and they catch the rainwater below. So these architects have looked at developing this practice into a kind of sculptural garden of sculptures that maximise this condensation, and they create shade, so they capture not only drinking water but begin to irrigate and create an oasis in the desert. So both these projects build on the relationship and the practices between people and their environment, nature and culture, and that is what I want to propose as being topomimicry. So bringing it back to Greenland, to my case study, what could this mean in Greenland? Excuse me. Greenland's this fascinating mix of quite traditional practices but very contemporary technology as well. But it's all connected by the intimacy between human and non-human in the environment. So building on that, one idea I have for one of my research by design experiments is I call pioneering Plant H2. So there's no energy grid per se in Greenland outside of cities. It's very much dependent on usually diesel generators out in the settlements. And mirroring this, there aren't really, there's very little in the way of hard infrastructure, roads and rails. It's all soft infrastructure. It's trails and tracks that come and go with the seasons. So it's infrastructure that is soft and of points rather than lines. So considering this, could we propose a hydrogen network where each settlement would have a hydrogen station fed by wind turbines that can act then as a hydrogen network of storage as well as instant energy. But so this is actually a pilot scheme just outside Nuuk for hydrogen station. That's what it looks like. But what I want to propose then is, could we, looking at architects like NL Architects in the Netherlands, this is a power plant, but they've used the cladding as a way of making it part of the community. So there's viewpoints, there's basketball hoops, there's climbing walls. So could we not put a climbing wall, but perhaps we wrap this hydrogen station in a snowmobile workshop? Perhaps one bit of cladding can fold out to become a shelter. By doing so, could we look at a hydrogen network then that not only provides clean and still independent energy in settlements, but by doing so strengthens the independence of the settlements and builds upon Greenlandic culture. Another idea I call blossoming solar flora. Now in Greenland it's a very short summer season, so both plants and people have to be spontaneous and respond to good weather. Now solar architecture in the Arctic doesn't fit with any conventional model of where is good for solar energy, but I would argue that during the summer it's unparalleled. So could we create, take this solar energy and create a sort of light solar architecture that could feed the increased demand for energy in the summer through tourism, as an increasing number of cruise ships coming in. So in the harbours there could be this light solar architecture that literally blossoms in the summer. Now there are some examples of quite literal solar flowers, but also in the military as well, so they can work in these environments. But I'm more interested in the Greenlandic tradition of living in tents in summer. This outdoor living is a very short season, using stretch skin tents. And again, the military has developed fabrics with integrated PVs. So there is a way of creating these fabric lightweight architectures that could, as I say, blossom in summer and allow for solar architecture to happen out with a conventional planning strategy. So in conclusion then, 4 quick points. One is that small-scale decentralised energy, and indeed energy that might not fit conventional notions of a good fit between the physical environment and an energy type, they can allow for more flexibility with less high investment at the beginning and enable something to grow and shrink in relation to needs. Secondly, that Greenland actually has a head start on many of us in Europe and elsewhere, but it's much less attached to this notion of stationarity. Thirdly, that topomimicry, it works best if it's kept local, and very importantly, consider it as a model, not an image to be imitated. And lastly, really what I'm advocating is a place-specific approach which deals with deep time, that is, deep pasts and deep futures. Thank you.
Pointed out that it's hard to see the screen, so you might want to sit down there for the third one so you can
Oh, okay.
see it better.
Sure. Will I switch this off now?
Our fourth speaker is Jón Þorvaldur Heiðarsson. He's a lecturer at the University of Akureyri, Iceland, and also has been a researcher at the University of Akureyri Research Center. He's an economist and physicist. His main research interests are energy matters and transportation, especially roads and tunnels and the social impacts of transportation improvements. Jón Þorvaldur, will be presenting sailing with containers through the Arctic. How can it be done and what will it mean? Thank you, Jón.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Is a mic here? Or? Okay, I stand here. Yeah. Hello, yes, okay. I want to talk a little bit about sailing through the Arctic, and especially sailing with containers. How can it be done and what will it mean? As you probably all know, the containers which are now going constantly between Europe and Asia, and mostly the cargo is coming from Asia, China and other countries to Western Europe, they go through the Suez Channel. It's a long way. And as you also know, it's shorter by sea between East Asia and or Northeast Asia and Northern Europe through the Arctic Ocean. And this route has been closed because of ice, and is still closed because of ice most months of the year. And in this talk I will talk about the outer northeastern sailing route. There is the inner and the outer northeast sailing route, and the outer is like we can see here. The outer one is out of the islands here. The inner one is here between the mainland and the islands of Siberia. This distance, for example, if you take two ports, two big ports, Rotterdam and Yokohama, between these harbors there are almost 21,000 kilometers through the Suez Channel, but less than 15,000 kilometers through the Arctic Sea. So the shortening is about 6,000 kilometers, and that's quite a lot. And one of the most important thing regarding sailing through Arctic is that the Arctic Sea, sailing through Arctic Sea is much deeper way or deeper route than the Suez route, and the barrier in the Suez route is the channel itself. And deeper sea allows bigger ships. This is very important. I will explain it a little bit later. Shorter distances save cost, and bigger ships save cost as well, and that's important to keep in mind. It's not only the shorter distances, it's also bigger ships. But the ice, of course, means more cost. So we have pluses and minuses. The minus is the ice, the pluses are bigger ships and shorter distances. But if the ice decreases, we will probably come to the point sometimes in the future somehow, that this route will be competitive with the Suez route, part of the year or even all year around. And if we put up three possibilities or three cases of how we should carry a container through the Arctic Sea or Arctic Ocean. One, just use usual container ships all the way from the start harbor, for example Yokohama, to Rotterdam. Two, use special designed Arctic ships to sail all the way from the start point to the end point. A third case, we would use special Arctic ships only through the Arctic, and use special transshipment harbors on the east side of the Arctic, and then we would use just usual container ships to carry the containers to and from these transshipment harbors. And if we look at the first case, use just usual container ships to sail through the Arctic. Benefits of that is that it's the cheapest way. It's lower cost than in case of special ships. So special Arctic ships, they would of course be more expensive than usual ships. And the running cost of usual container ships is lower than of special ice designed ships. and there is no transshipment cost. This ship would just sail all the way from, say, Yokohama to Rotterdam and back. The disadvantages to this possibility or this case is that usual ships, they are not designed for sailing in ice. They could only sail this route for a few weeks in each year or not at all. And there's a risk of accident because they are not designed to sail in ice. We would risk human lives, we would risk capital, and we would set the environment in danger because of accidents. And also disadvantage to this, using the same ship all the way, disadvantage to that is that it sets a barrier for the evolution towards bigger ships. Because now existing harbors, they can only take ships up to some point of size. So this possibility is probably no possibility at all. It's probably not very wise to use usual container ships through the Arctic. But who knows, maybe, I don't know. Next, the second chance, the second possibility, using special Arctic ships all the way. Benefits of that, they are designed to sail in ice. It would not cost us problem regarding that. There's no transshipment cost, they would sail all the way. But disadvantage to that is that it's expensive to use these special designed ships for sailing in usual sea. The usual container ships are much more economical in that way. There's more investment and more running cost than in case of usual ships. And as in the first case, this would also set barrier how big the ships could be. But okay, the third case, we would use special Arctic ships and special transshipment harbors. Benefits of that is that these ships would be designed to sail in ice, no risk of trouble or less risk of trouble, and the evolution in the size of ships would be set free. Bigger ships save cost, as I said. And if we could use bigger ships, we will use less oil, it would lower freight cost, and it would mean less emission of CO2. Here we see the biggest container ship in the world in the year 2006. It contains or can carry 15,500 20-foot containers. But as you see, these containers are mostly 40 foot. But this is a unit used, TEU, 20-foot equivalent units. But this is no more the biggest ship. This is the biggest ship now. This was launched only a few weeks ago, and it can take 18,270 20-foot containers. This ship can only use 16 harbors in the world. It's too big for the other ones. The draught is too much. How much it goes under sea level is too much. If we would take this third case, building special harbors on each side of the Arctic, the ships which could sail there between, they could be much bigger than these ships. We should expect them to be very huge. We could see ships which are twice as big as this one. With the draught, or how much under sea level they go, more than 20 meters. meaning that they had no chance to go into port like Rotterdam or other ports. Disadvantages to this case is that we have to make these special ports then. They are expensive to do, of course, but some say the world economy needs more ports anyway, so building these ports is no additional cost to the world economy. And it's a transshipment cost. Container going this way from, say, Yokohama to Rotterdam, he has to change ships twice. He goes with the usual ship to transshipment harbor, then through the Arctic with special ship, and then from the harbor on the Europe side with usual ship to Rotterdam or Copenhagen or what. These special harbors, what about them then? The depth in these harbors must be much deeper than today. 25 to 30 meters. They need land, flat land above the harbor. Deep sea and flat land is not easy to find. It's very easy to find conditions like this: flat land, shallow sea. And it's very easy to find the conditions like this: steep land, deep sea. But it's not easy to find flat land and then deep sea. These conditions are not all around. Security control must be easy, good harbor conditions, shelter for waves and not against open sea, close to the Arctic but without ice. And if this is the best way, where's the best place to put these harbors? On the European side and on the Asia side. And then we come to Iceland, and now we come to what I have been studying. I looked at 4 places in Iceland. Here is the transshipment harbor close to Reykjavik. And we see that the extra distance for a container to go is quite long. If it goes from the Arctic directly to Rotterdam, it's this red line here. And the extra distance, if it goes to close to Reykjavik, then it's here. We see it's a quite long extra distance. Same with the transshipment port in Westfjords in Iceland. It's extra distance. So we have to move a little bit to the east of Iceland. Here is the case of transshipment harbor here, very close to Akureyri, just here outside. We see that the extra distance is not as much as in West Iceland, but quite though. Here we are in the eastest part of Iceland. Here is a good fjord to having a transshipment port, and now we see that the extra distance is a little bit going down here rather than this red line here from the Arctic. And this is the fjord. It's very deep. It's over 100 meters deep, and no problem with that. But the problem is that the space in this fjord is not so much. The best flat land is here, but this has already been taken by aluminium smelter. So the space is not so much. Here we see the extra distance. Extra distance from Reyðarfjörður in the eastern part of Iceland is the smallest, if we could say, of these 4. But recently it has been pointed out that a harbor in the place like here, in the Bakka, in Finnafjörður, could be a possibility. And that's okay also, it's quite east. But what would it mean? What would a special harbor like this mean? It would probably mean that freight cost from 2 points on the planet would be the lowest. And these 2 points would be these 2 harbors. It probably would mean that that if you would like to set up a factory producing some goods which you would ship all around the world, it would be best regarding to freight cost to put them close to these transshipment harbors. We in the north, we are used to be on the edge. We are used that it's higher freight cost to and from our environment than for those who are more in the middle of the world, middle of Europe or North America or something like that. If these transshipment ports would be done in this way, we would suddenly be in the middle regarding carrying freight all around the world. So that would change a lot for us. Such harbor could change economy dramatically in a region, whether it's northern or eastern Iceland or North Norway or where it is. It could change cold economy to a hot international economy. But this has also some dark sides, of course. With a big, huge harbor like this, with cargo coming from Asia to Europe and from Europe to Asia, everything would be carried in these containers. Drugs, maybe people, slaves, weapons, and everything. So it has also dark sides. I'm finished with the time, so thank you.
That one actually over the table if you'd like, so you can pass it. Thank you very much to all our speakers. I'd like to open it up to questions and discussion from the audience now, if you'd like, for any of the speakers. No questions. Understood everything perfectly. No curiosity. Yes, Steve.
I have a question for Susan. Using these new technologies and these new designs of buildings in Greenland, is your ultimate goal to make them sustainable and self-sufficient in the long run? Or is it just to relieve some of the stress on some of the energy sources that they need to use?
I think it's two things really. One is this notion of resilience. Better. You have to excuse my voice, I cold. So the idea about building in cushioning and flexibility for this, as I know the keynote later is going to be about the certainty of uncertainty. But also important for me is that there's so much pressure and stress about pushing for accessing the fossil fuels and the rare earth minerals as well, but my primary concern is about the fossil fuels. And one can, of course, understand that from an economic and therefore social development point of view. So I guess what I'm trying to do, in a small way, is to begin to look at ways that you can displace some of that pressure, to ease some of that. There is, of course, there are kind of two sides of it. One is about looking at settlements, just allowing them to become independent and cleaner and sustainable. But some other parts of my work that I didn't talk about today is looking at larger scale energy, more utility scale as well. Because I think you need both of those if you're going to start looking at economic and social development solutions.
Please.
How are the ones that you've been testing bearing up under some of these extreme weather conditions?
Are you finding some more favorable than others?
The technologies, you mean?
Yes, and some of the buildings that you've also described.
I've been borrowing quite a lot from military and also research technology. So, for example, in the Arctic and indeed the Antarctic, there have been various design competitions looking at new research stations out on the ice sheets. And so there's quite a lot to learn from there, both contemporary research stations and military stations, but also how ones from decades ago have fared. And there's quite a lot of lessons to be learned there, some very basic stuff about foundations and about materials, and because there's so much shift in the cryosphere. And as I mentioned a couple of times, the military as well test things in quite extreme conditions. Now, the real longevity of these isn't really known, a lot of the contemporary technology at the moment. However, to an extent, well, these two examples I gave, in my work I have maybe 6 design experiments, and half of them are about soft or fast solutions, and the other half are about harder, more long-term solutions. Now, these two both fall under the first category there. So they really are designed to look at branching, in this transition zone. So it's not really about longevity, but about flexibility, and the other part of my work looks more at longevity.
Hi, thank you. Thank you both for your talk, and all of you. I missed already, although the first two, but so my question will be to both of the latter speakers. First, in terms of Susan, to you, Anthropocenic architecture you mentioned, is that an established field by now? Is it a theme ongoing in architecture? And if so, could you maybe sort of run through the guiding principles, or if there are any established principles or guidelines for, or conceptual points that people navigate from in terms of that thing, Anthropocenic architecture, that is. And to Jón Þorvaldur, one thing around the Arctic shipping and containing, if you could reflect a little bit on the role of existing infrastructure and the need for other infrastructure in order to sustain these massive harbors. Like, for instance, if you have the suggestion of Finnafjörður, which is basically void of population and infrastructure, more or less, how would other infrastructure needs, because that's the case in most of the Arctic actually, I mean, how would other infrastructure needs impact the potential harbor developments?
Well, port like this, if we are talking about the port first, it would need space. It would need cheap land. And so it's probably not in the question to put it somewhere where it's very populated. It would be so expensive to buy the land needed. So probably it have to be in some rural area. But at the same time, it needs, of course, a lot of infrastructure. It would be a place where several hundred people would be working. For example, regarding Finnafjörður, the infrastructure is very low or not very much there. It would be better to have it close to some stronger infrastructure, for example, Reyðarfjörður or Akureyri or something like that. But as I say, it needs a space. It also, for security reasons and so on, it's not to put it in some place where it's very populated around. What would happen? How would it influence other parts of the Arctic or so on? It would more or less only affect these 2 points, and of course the surroundings about them. It would not affect people living on the Siberia coast or something like that. These ships would only pass by. They would not stop on the way through the Arctic. But as I said, it would be dramatic change for societies which have been on the edge since the beginning of time, we could say, on the edge. But suddenly they were not on the edge anymore. They were in the middle. It would be connected to the other part of the earth, the shortcut. It would. It's probably so dramatic change in how we think that it's difficult to understand what it would be. I hope this answers your question in some way.
Is anthropocenic architecture established? No. I've never actually heard the term, so it's slightly self-propagated, I guess. I'm borrowing very heavily from, two other disciplines. One is really sociology, particularly Bruno Latour's work. And he speaks about the politics of nature and the end of nature, as well as material semiotics and actor network theory and so forth, which are all really founded on this idea about objects and people and things all being part of one system. So that's one part that I borrow upon. And the other is really from the arts. There was examples I mentioned, but also in Tromsø at the Arctic Frontiers Conference earlier this year, I heard William Fox speak, and he's a curator at the Gallery of Modern Art in Nevada, calling it the right thing. And his work is really about art of the Anthropocene. And I was very much inspired by that. He collects art from Aboriginal through also to contemporary urban centres that's made, and it's all work that in some way references post-industrialised the world that we live in this increased amount of connectivity. So within architecture itself, no, the term is not frequently used, and it's certainly not established as a movement of any sort. I could possibly try and pick out some other examples that, in my opinion, like landscape urbanism, which is very much an emerging and semi-established movement. There are other sorts of architecture that maybe deal with it in quite a literal way, but in terms of theory, no, not so much.
My name is Haldur Johansson. I'm actually a landscape architect and planner. I have comments or questions on both of those, actually. I studied in Toronto quite many years ago, and there was actually quite a lot of discussion about Nordic or Arctic architecture at the time. Canadians were putting quite a lot of effort into adaptability of design in the north. I know a lot of it hasn't developed the way it was maybe planned, but there was work going on, and it was also quite related to something called winter cities, which was a cooperation between cities in the north, and the Japanese were quite advanced or quite forward in that, just like a comment. So I think it's an interesting question, and I think it's an interesting approach to maybe revitalize a bit. On the harbor issue, I've also been working on planning harbors in this particular one in Finnafjörður, and I've also been taking quite active part in Arctic discussions. I was out in China 2 months ago, where a Chinese scientist, scholar, predicted that by 2030 the container traffic through the Arctic would be similar to all container traffic in the world 2 years ago. And that's a lot of traffic. If we look at the container harbor in Shanghai, which lies 130 kilometers away from Shanghai, because I think the question is economics of the location rather than economics of the people living there, because you relocate people quite easily I would think that would be a stronger component. So I think the harbor in Finnafjörður, that's not the issue of how far it is from Akureyri. It's how economical is that location in a global context. The harbor in Shanghai has 5.5 square kilometers of container area facilities, 5.6 kilometers of quay for the ships to come up against in one single row. I think the only location in Iceland where it's feasible to do something similar, if it's feasible to do it in Iceland at all, would be in Finnafjörður. But I think we should always approach such questions in a more sort of a global approach first, and we have to, of course, sell the fact, if we are looking at it from the Icelandic point of view, that is Iceland economical, is Iceland the best location, and then we decide on a location within Iceland afterwards. But I'm very curious to take it a bit further. What is really the ruling factor in all this? Is it the location of the people, or is it the economics of the whole transportation issue? Because most of this cargo is not going to Iceland, is it? It will be continuing to somewhere else, if it's going to be in Iceland. Thank you.
Should we respond on that? Okay. It's correct that it's possible to put down some activity, especially if it's a big one, a harbor or aluminum smelter or something, and if that activity is paying good salaries and so on, people will come and the infrastructure will be created. So that's no problem. That's correct. But of course, the start is easier if you have the infrastructure already. So people have to live somewhere and where are working there and so on. So it's probably only part of the calculation of the cost. Of course, we have to look at are the harbor conditions, are they there or not? Is it on a good place? Is this extra distant? Is it long or short? And as I said, East Iceland, it's much better than West Iceland. So Finnafjörður is on East Iceland. That's a good factor for them or for that place. So if the infrastructure is not already there, it's no problem in the case that you can build it up. But it's, as I say, I think it's only one point in the total calculations, whether it's economical to do it or not.
Well, here's Timur. Well, Halldór, thank you for those comments, and I know you've been quite busy there in the east part, and like I said in my talk, I have several master students who wants to come and do some planning there. So maybe I will contact you about that. But I think, first of all, it's a financial question. Do we have the money to build it up? And then, well, we live in a society that is driven by economic factors, so I think that's a very strong factor. And like Jón pointed out in his talk, so it's mainly the route maybe to the America that is more shorter. So it's and then maybe it's not the east port we should look at. So you should buy some property in the west as well, I think. But then again, this is planning issue and this land value, and also like we see after the economic crash, a lot of people got unemployed and they moved to Norway or somewhere else, and they will probably be eager to move back home. So if there is a job, they can probably build a house there. So I wouldn't worry about the people coming.
Yes, Lassie.
Thank you,
Thank you for your presentations. Very, very interesting. I was wondering. I mean, four different, rather much different presentations, four interesting points of view. But there is, I think, there is exactly this one common factor there that like it should be that climate change is influencing this, or that's how I read them, how I interpret them. But I mean, can we imagine that there are some learned lessons, not only lesson to learn, but learned lesson from the fiscal, economic, political crisis? What is there? That to have big numbers, that is always needed. Like when we are talking about the use of northern sea routes, so it's very much economics driven. How I see it. I understand very well that there are some points of view coming from save energy, be friendly for the environment, and so on. But isn't that so that there is so much the fate of economic growth behind there, that we are thinking that, yeah, that will grow. World trade will grow. But is that really so? I mean, who says that is the starting point? Can't we have an alternative way to think? That I mean, small is beautiful, and then instead of trying to desperately to find a place for huge harbor, yes, I have visited in deep water harbor in Shanghai. It's a terrible place. It's really, the scale is too big, absolutely too big. So can we, I mean, my question is, well, for those who would like to, that are there some learned lessons that we might to think about, an alternative way to do? And then maybe your answer is reindeer herding here, or hunting, I don't know, I mean, or architecture, or something like that. So this is, sorry about this, a little bit more philosophical thinking, but thank you.
Well, I think it's no straightforward answer. It's a lovely thought, and don't lose it.
I've certainly been influenced by people like Tim Jackson in his book Prosperity Without Growth. I think just the title itself is quite instructive in many ways. So putting emphasis on lifestyle and about growth of life quality, and not sacrificing all of that just for the sake of pure sheer economic growth. And in my work, that's certainly something I try and underlined without becoming rose-tinted about the necessity of economic development to some extent.
Okay, should I try to say something? This is, of course, totally correct. We live in a world where we expect endless growth. And will it be endless, or will it not? It's very difficult to say. But, of course, the crisis, as you mentioned the crisis, if some system like this, new harbors would have been built on east side, and the system should be set off for working, and then would come crisis, very big crisis. Cut in container shipping would be, say, 30%, something. What would happen then? We would probably get bankruptcy. And all things also, okay, we are now living in a world where everything which is produced in Asia, or almost everything. All the things we are using day to day, 80-90% of that is produced in Asia. So the Western world is carrying endlessly some things from Asia to Europe. Will that last forever? No, probably not. As countries get richer, when China get richer, they will not anymore be the producer of the world. The production after 50 years or 100 years will maybe be in Africa, not Asia. When Asia will be more like the economy of the Western world, just like Japan evolved. We were importing loads of things from Japan a half century ago, only 30 decades ago, I was going to say. That have changed. So everything is changing. Growth is not endless in the sense that it's a steady growth. It goes ups and downs, and the economy of the world will change. So we have to keep that in mind. That's correct. Good point.
I wanted to add to that after the economic crash, we saw in urban planning, which is my field, empty neighborhoods in the capital area. And then I wrote a piece about the need for having Plan B, because we're always planning for growth. And a good example of this recently is Detroit and what's been happening there. So, yeah, you never know what's going to happen.
Julia, did you have a question?
Hello, my name is Julia Martin. I'm one of the young researchers of the NRF. I have a question to both Sigríður and Jón. Jón, you mentioned that the area around a big harbor like that would potentially become attractive for new enterprises, industrial enterprises, for production and manufacturing, perhaps, and aluminium smelters or something else, some kind of heavy industries. And I would like to ask both of you if such speculative secondary developments would be considered, if it would come to planning stages, in the environmental assessment reports for such a transshipment harbor, and what the procedures might be. How far do these environmental assessment reports look? This may be also second question. Sigríður, you mentioned that environmental impact assessment is quite young in Iceland. Only started in 2006. I was very surprised by that. And could you maybe say something about the history of this planning instrument? Thank you.
Actually, I think it's good questions, and I could actually give a paper on that. But we were just late to implement the environmental assessment and the strategy plans. We were rather late in Iceland. And I think the political parties, it was political, and they spent a lot of time to try to fight this. They didn't want to do it. But then finally they took it up. And of course, it would put some restraints on a development on this big scale, but we have a case, older case where they tried to stop development Kárahnjúkavirkjun, but they didn't exceed the government overall. So in the end, it's the government, and it's a political questions. But the measure is there, and we have to trust in the government.
Yes, regarding production close to transshipment harbor, which would be some middle point in sailings through Asia and then to other places on the North Atlantic. I think it would be very difficult to say that it would surely be the effect, but there are pluses and minuses with everything. if we talk about Iceland, Iceland has plus with rather cheap electricity, for example. Iceland has plenty of land. Does that mean that everybody wants to build up a factory here? No, it doesn't mean that. If we had additionally low freight costs from Iceland, would that change everything? It's very difficult to say, but it's probably on that side. It would make that area around the harbor a little bit more competitive regarding production. But as I said, the production now is more or less in China. Would we then begin to compete with China in production? I doubt that. But I haven't examined this, and this is a very open question, and maybe somebody here in the room can tell more about it than me.
Well, actually, it has been changing already. I mean, already a few years ago, from China to Vietnam, for example, now production is coming back to Europe, eastern part of Europe. So the change has already started. I guess that the figures will come down soon, and that has a rather serious impact here if we will plan these transportation routes for the next 15, 20, 25 years, if it will come back really. Or then there will be a decrease of production even.
Thank you. This is a highly interesting topic, something we could talk about for weeks and weeks. It's very, it's something that I feel very strongly about. I've been spending a lot of energy on it. Because of course energy is a fundamental thing in everything. We know of an example here in Eyjafjörður, close to Akureyri, or in Akureyri, that aluminum is actually shipped from Milan in Italy to Akureyri for the sole thing of creating small lines in it, using electricity, shipping it back to Italy to be used inside batteries. So transportation, of course, is not the main issue in this case, it's the energy. And we have lots of energy in Iceland, and probably if climate change prevails, we will have more energy. And we still haven't started using wind energy. And the area, again, in Finnafjörður, is the area in Iceland where we have the strongest prevailing winds, constant winds. So looking at the results that our national power company has just had with wind turbines, where the wind turbines in Iceland are creating a lot more energy than it's globally perceived possible, we could probably create a lot of energy in that area. And then, of course, there are predictions that with the melting ice in Greenland, there could be possibilities of hydro energy in Greenland, and that most likely would then be taken over to Iceland to utilize it. Well, whether we like that picture or not, we should investigate it, because it has a lot of potential. And then another issue, of course, is the security. And clean energy is very important, but you know that in Greenland is probably one of the biggest resources of natural resources in the world, and there are zinc mines, there are iron ore mines and whatnot. And the oil and gas by the northeast coast of Greenland is probably the biggest unused resources in the world. And if you look at the security in a global context, shipping that to Iceland, refining it, and then to market, that's at least a scenario we should investigate very thoroughly.
Well, I think we have time for just one more quick question, if anybody has one, before we all go for an enjoyable lunch. No? Okay. Well, I would like everyone to join me in both thanking our participants and joining us here for the NRF. I appreciate the dialogue and questions and comments that you've had. It's made for a very stimulating and dynamic discussion, and please join me in thanking all of our guest speakers today as well.
Thank you very much for your help.
That's a very nice presentation.